Hi there, it's Lester Martin from Hortonworks University, and I want to finish up the Hadoop Essentials course with a very relevant and very important module that's focused squarely on security and in your Hadoop cluster itself. So we'll definitely make sure we echo out the requirements that are needed to be met in a Hadoop cluster today, and then take a typical strategy, a typical use case out there of Hive connections, Hive queries, etc. from clients, and we'll layer on them multiple strategies, as you see in that second set of sub bullets there. And these deployment strategies could be mixed and matched in some manner as the most appropriate to you, but I'll take them as more of a linear add one, add one, add one to ultimately drive us to the end visualization of what would be an all-in security profile. And I think you'll see that's quite comprehensive. Part of all this is one project that's really critical in this space. It's called Apache Ranger, so I'll definitely come back and toward the end and circle back and reiterate, show some screenshots, and ultimately do a demonstration of how we can secure secure resources, secure data, secure access, etc. with Ranger, and do a demonstration with that. So as we look at security, many people probably have thought of historically security beyond the AAA, authentication, authorization, and auditing information. But as we look at Hadoop, and Hadoop being a data platform itself, we really have to consider the data that's at rest, the data that sits on the file system, as well as we have data in transit, in motion, etc. across the wire, and determine what makes the most sense for our particular organization. And if you take all that into account and realize that Hadoop, as we explored earlier in the ecosystem, is a collection of a bunch of Apache software projects out there, this distribution that we call HDP, having a consistent, central administrative tool is critical to really pull all this together. So we've added that to the formal requirements list as well. Obviously, I just kind of hinted around to it. HDP is comprehensive, complete in addressing this set of functionalities here, top to bottom, and then ultimately trying to put that together as that very first requirement into some kind of a simple, straightforward, leverageable, usable interface to administer across the entire security gamut. In this slide, what I'm going to try to do is, again, take those requirements, the AAA, the data protection, as well as the other one I mentioned there, and just layer on what Apache software projects are helping us in that space or focus on that space. So I'll add in that fifth kind of centralized security administration, and definitely mention that Apache Ranger is the tool that we advocate for this solution. We'll show some of that via demonstration and some screenshots shortly. And while Apache Ranger is many people think about authorization, one thing it does exceptionally well is to commingle and pull together a comprehensive audit set across all the features, across all the functionality and tools, HBase, Hive, Storm, etc., and collects those in a centralized place, which is perfect for reporting, either from the tools present today in Apache Ranger, or possibly you have a security collection agent that's further downstream that looks across your entire enterprise. Great opportunity to also share that information, consistent single source from all things that happen in your Hadoop cluster into that tool. I did say that really what most people think about with Ranger is the fact that we do maintain authorization policies in that world, so definitely we're going to cover that and show why that shines exceptionally well. But as we look at the very front end for authentication, the real technology that you should be aware of is called Kerberos. That's our opportunity to verify that the person who initially authenticates with something like a username and password can be strongly authenticated throughout. Hadoop really is a bunch of processes talking to a bunch of other processes, and we want to make sure we have the opportunity to bring with us something forward, a tick in, a session ticket, etc., that exists in the Kerberos technology that we can then say for sure, yes, this is this person, or this is this application account that was created, initialized a little bit earlier, and then be comfortable that is the person or the application who we think it is really is that person or application. And then lastly is data protection. So we have very documented and supported processes for all the inter-process communications that exist out there, and on our docs.hortonworks.com site. And you have to really take some deep investigation to determine which ones, if any of these technologies you want to employ or these strategies you want to employ, and then go down those paths and implement them. But probably the piece that people think about in data protection is the data at rest, encrypting data at rest. We have a rich set of partners out there that focus almost squarely and almost solely in that space that you can leverage and integrate with, as well as Apache Hadoop itself having a set of features or technology that is referred to as transparent encryption that could also be leveraged as well. So I'm going to take, again, I'll take a simple use case that's out there, and that's one that's it's probably in almost every single Hadoop cluster that's installed somewhere. Everyone leverages Hive to some point. So this is an example of a client of Hive going through Hive Server 2, making a JDBC or ODBC connection, and ultimately, something like running a query. So very straightforward, very well-known use case out there. As you start thinking about layering on security, one of the things that we'll do very early, or should be considering to do very early, is implement strong authentication. Again, I mentioned earlier that's through this technology called Kerberos, and really what we're talking about here is at initial login time, when a person or an application presents some kind of credentials, we want to create what's referred to as a service ticket in Kerberos, but it's basically something that validates as a piece of data, something that user can bring forward with them as subsequent requests, as well as can be passed through the system to get to periodically validate that yes, this person that logged in really is this person. This person is who they say they are. And again, person could be a human, carbon-based life form, or could in fact be an application, if that makes sense, and it often does as well. Getting past authentication, we really start thinking about authorization. Can this person do this particular activity, see this particular thing? And this is where things get a little more open-ended, I guess you could say, and it's not a Hadoop issue. This is just how applications themselves throughout for a long time in technology kind of do their own authorization. Why? Because what are they authorizing? Different HDFS is authorizing access to files. What you could do to a file is different than maybe a table, and what you can do to a table, etc. So it's not any different in Hadoop. Most of these applications, most of these components, Hive, HBase, HDFS, etc., have their own authorization hooks natively. They store so how you set permissions, etc., create policies is completely different from component 1 to component 2, and how those components then store and audit that information is also bespoke and separated from all the others. So Ranger steps in. Apache Ranger really solves both of those problems. We have the concept of a single policy management interface server, as well as an interface visual or REST API that allows us to create policies against particular sets of services such as Hive, HBase, HDFS, etc., and present that in a consistent way. And you'll see that in the screenshots and in the demonstration shortly. And then ultimately, as well, present a auditing server model that allows that service, such as Hive, to then share and publish a commingled set of auditing information with all other things that Ranger is overseeing. Next, we probably are starting to think at this point another common layer is to implement Apache Knox. And Apache Knox actually firms up in very rigid manner, creates a wall around your Hadoop cluster. We don't want the whole world, the whole application, the whole data center to see every node in your cluster. But sometimes we have some mix and match of those things, and we do a variety of things network-wise to get there. But Apache Knox actually lets us truly physically isolate that cluster, and it puts a piece of software in the middle, maybe even in a DMZ surrounded by firewalls in the front, firewalls in the back, so that now requests actually come into Apache Knox, and then Apache Knox could proxy those requests inbound into the cluster. So we definitely want to continue to leverage all the things we just mentioned around Ranger being for authorization and auditing, and we definitely want to use authentication. I use Kerberos to aid in authentication, and this model actually provides us an opportunity, should it make sense, for those additional those clients themselves to present to Knox their credentials, their username password style credentials, and then let Apache Knox authenticate for them, for that person or application, create that service ticket as I mentioned earlier, and then propagate that service ticket inbound. So very natural, next step beyond the base authentication and authorization we just mentioned that are themselves very critical. And then, again, as we kind of go further and further into each one of these layers, in some ways, you have to make some choices when, where, and why you need to do all these activities. Again, we're focused on presenting an all-in security strategy. So it doesn't mean you have to do all these things, but they all are worth considering. So we see a lot of these little SSL little channels here, really just trying to imply that, make the point that all communication in a modern Hadoop cluster, especially using HTTP, could be enabled for SSL, for encryption in transit, in motion, however you like to represent that. And then these little padlocks over here in HDFS, again, are suggesting that we can definitely do encryption at rest using partner technologies or using native Hadoop's transparent encryption. So again, when you step through all four of those strategies, really do have a very rich, a very solid security profile that should get through almost all but the most rigorous, should get you through all security audits, let me say it that way. So a very comprehensive set of tools and technologies and strategies. So as promised, I'll mention a little bit more and give you some visualization around Apache Ranger, especially in that authorization and auditing space. So as I mentioned, as authorization, and I'm trying to show you here, maybe in these sub bullets right here, that we're depending on the thing we're applying authorization on. Depending on the service we're using that we would like to implement authorization policies on. That particular service has different kinds of things, different kinds of terms that it's trying to secure. HBase is thinking about tables, and yeah, Hive has tables, but HBase has column families, which is a concept that doesn't exist in Hive. HBase has some more advanced things such as labels and beyond. HDFS itself is thinking about files and folders. So we're going to try to make sure that we make sure with Apache Ranger that we do have a tool that allows both a consistent interface against different types of services, but allows the service itself that's implemented, integrated with Apache Ranger to integrate with the things it's building access on. After that, who can use that access looks very similar in the user experience, etc. And then again, I mentioned, to me personally, the combined audit log, the comprehensive audit log across all of these services is really something I've seen my customers and my experience even been more powerful than just the very, very useful single interface, single policy management server. So a couple screens trying to imply and try to give you some visualization of what that pane of glass might look like. So maybe on the left, as we come into Ranger, we see a little bit about different types of repositories, or this is what I was referring to as services that we have a Ranger administering and maintaining policies for. And then the bigger screenshot here on the right here is showing that, hey, once we get into a particular repository or service type, what we do with is a little different. In the policy detail space, we'll definitely have a policy name enabled or not. We'll have an audit logging enabled or not. And then the widgets in the middle here are really going to be dependent on the technology or the component. So this is looking at Hive, database, the database name, table names, column names, etc. So this middle section will look slightly different in what questions we ask here, because it will be slightly different based on the technology, but how we represent it will be consistent. And then lastly, on the bottom of that, who and where, who can do those things. So definitely this groups and users will be consistent, and then this table itself will be dependent on these particular items. So the things you could do, there are probably more opportunities for permissioning on a particular item in Hive than say they are in HDFS itself, the file system. Can delete it, read it, etc. So again, a comprehensive tool. And again, this maybe shows the same thing for HDFS. So the policy name here, the logging here, and then the middle is a little different. In HDFS, we're building policies around locations. That could be a folder, a file, again, recursive folder definition, etc. Wildcarding could be a variety of things. And the concept of recursiveness definitely makes sense in a file system, while maybe not in a database as well. And then as you see here, the opportunities are slightly different. We don't have as many options that we apply to this particular group, user, etc. As well. So very consistent interface, as long as we understand that different service types, different component types have different things to, in fact, build a policy around. But as I mentioned, to me, the most useful information is having a comprehensive tool here that runs us through users, what they were doing, the particular resource, etc., including, do they make it or not. And this is just kind of narrowing it down to only Hive. This might be a model where you're looking for particular things, you find something, then you add, mix and match, you look across all repository types, technology types, or hone in on just one. So very, very powerful. Not just this visual tool, but having that information all put together is extremely important and valuable in most organizations. And I think one of the last key points I want to make is that with Apache Ranger, how does it do that? It uses a plug-in architecture, simply meaning that we're injecting some software in those various services, such as you see here, and we're really just trying to be a bit of an interceptor. So when HBase, when HDFS, etc., when that code block finally says, hey, can this user do this thing, we're trying to intercept that call, integrate with our Ranger's policy server to then determine an answer and then hand that answer back to the application itself, and it just falls through and acts appropriately beyond that. So these plugins do have to they're not just generic, because every one of these frameworks allows integration differently. So we have to custom build these things. They're all, again, open source. They're all available to anyone and everyone. No intellectual property for sure. All Apache Software Foundation source code. But very critical, very useful. And that plugin also allows us to integrate with that consistent and simultaneous integrated auditing information as well. So again, super critical, very important. All right, quick knowledge check, and we'll wrap it up with a demo on Apache Ranger. The primary requirements for security, and we talked about them being the classic AAA of authentication, authorization, and auditing, as well as data protection, encryption of data at rest, data in motion, and then wrapping all that up with a comprehensive administrative set of features, tools, etc. For strong authentication, we're really talking about Kerberos and that Kerberos service ticket concept that's was here long before Hadoop and actually leveraged in many other technologies as well. And then maybe the last question, what requirements does Ranger address? It's hitting on a number of those activities. It's hitting on, for sure, the authorization policies that it creates, the auditing information associated with those, as well as a comprehensive administrative tool across all of that, as well as the key stores, etc., that you might think of when we talk about data protection or encryption at rest as well. Oh, apologize. One more question. Do we tackle data encryption at rest or in motion? Yes. In fact, I know that's not how the question asked, but we do both. Data encryption in transit as well as physically at rest. So quick summary. These almost mirror the exact questions we just asked. And again, we'll finish up this module. We'll actually finish up the course with a demonstration around Apache Ranger. Thank you so much.